All right, everybody, good evening. We started out with a little technical difficulty, but we're all fixed up and ready to go. So welcome to our first of our winter-spring series of 2024. As usual through the years, we want to thank Garden Spot Village for having us here and allowing us to have our programs come here. Over here to my left, your right, is a donation jar and some membership forms. You get a newsletter when you sign up for become a member for us. This past January, we sent out our largest newsletter ever. So if you got one, it was very impressive. So sign up so you get another one. Our museum hours, Thursday and Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're working on some new displays right now. One is local barns, and another one is the 65th anniversary of FFA from Garden Spot High School. And that is quite the large display that we have going up. So you need to come up and see it. Our next meeting is March 21st, and that will be the history of Watton-Shan. Our April 18th meeting is called Voices of Amish Women in Lancaster County, and that's by Julie Stravinsky. And where'd he go? Do you want to say anything? No. Okay. Then we'll move on to our presenter. This is... Oh, our May meeting, yes, I don't know the date offhand. It's going to be LNP's Jack Brubaker. We'll be here for a question and answer session to get to know him better and his life and the history he writes about Lancaster County. So tonight we'll start with our program from Cory Van Brookhaven. He's a journalist, an author, and he's president of Lidditz Historical Foundation. So Cory?
Thank you. All right, let me get my mic turned on here. All right. Oh, all right. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. After the program, I have all kinds of photos, magazine articles, an old tobacco card, original poster, all these kinds of things. Feel free to take a look at after the program. Is anyone familiar with that name, Leo Houck? Some of you are. Does anybody remember him? He died in 1950, so most of you are too young probably to remember, right? But that's the subject of tonight's presentation, legendary Lancaster boxer Leo Houck. And I hope that by the end of the program, you'll realize how unique he was in many ways, not just because he was from this area, not just because he was a professional boxer. I see we have some family in the audience. Try to hold your questions till the end. And are we able to dim the lights a little bit, or? All right, good. So again, welcome. My name's Cory Van Brookhaven, and I'm with the Lidditz Historical Foundation, and we have a great relationship with New Holland. So as I said, tonight we're going to be talking about Leo Houck, legendary boxer. He was also known as the Lancaster Lightning Bolt. So he was born November 4th, 1888 in Lancaster. His parents were Edward and Mary, and they emigrated from Germany. Leo grew up at 654 Manor Street in the 8th Ward of the Cabbage Hill District, which is also in Lancaster City. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that area. He had 6 siblings, so the parents had to take care of 7 kids who were hungry and had to be clothed. Aside from boxing, and this will come up several times throughout the presentation, Leo also excelled in baseball, football, and basketball. So he was an all-around athlete. Obviously, his expertise was in the ring, in boxing, but it's very important to understand that he was very athletic in these sports as well. His whole family was Catholic. They were devout Catholics. He attended St. Joe's School, finishing 8th grade. That was the case back then. Graduating at age 14. And just as the case was for so many kids his age during that time, he entered the workforce. And he was employed, as the screen says, as an office boy at the Hamilton Watch Company. Sorry, I keep wanting to point it at the screen. I have to point it back there. I have to remember that. So he loved the sport of boxing from a very early age. Matter of fact, as you can see, his first fight was at age 14. And as far as we know, that's him probably at around that age. He fought Carl Krekel. Now, keep in mind, at that age, it wasn't in front of hundreds of people. You know, it wasn't on a grand stage or in a big fancy ring. But it lasted 4 rounds, and the end of the fight, consequently, it ended in a newspaper decision draw. And I'll get back to the newspaper decisions later on. Each boy was paid $1 silver for their efforts, and they also got to keep the boxing gloves that they were given, okay? So you could argue that this was his first paid fight, even though it wasn't professional by any means, even though he was only 14, certainly far from being a pro. He slowly rose up the ranks. He stuck with the game. He eventually met a gentleman there, that's Leo seated. That's his very first manager, Jack Miley. Jack Miley came from Lancaster to Philadelphia. Jack Miley was a more or less retired boxer in his own right. He opened a gym in Lancaster. Leo started showing up. Jack saw a lot of promise in this young boy. He was dedicated, he was hungry, and he wanted to learn. And he seemed to be very mature for his age. So he took him under his wing. Next thing you know, he was his manager and would stay his manager for 6 years, from 1904 to 1910. Leo's next manager was Lou Durlacher, who we'll also get back to. By 1906, during the time Jack Miley was managing him, by 1906, Leo had left his job, okay, to focus on boxing full time. So he's had some matches, certainly a gamble at this time. His family was well against it. His father would pass away when he was a young boy. You had to work. You had to earn money for the family back then. And his mother, who was against the sport because she didn't want to see her son get beat up, she also thought, well, if he's going to do this full time, we have no idea how this is going to turn out. Is he going to make money? Well, he had enough confidence in himself, and his family finally got behind him, that he quit his job to pursue boxing full time. So that was a big risk he took at such an early age. As I said, he was making more money in the ring than he was during working at the watch factory. Finally, he had his first real fight with a guy named Shorty Groff, okay? February 17th, 1905 at Melancourt Hall in Lancaster. A lot of these places were opera houses. They were athletic halls, athletic facilities, gymnasiums. I would say probably all these places are long gone. Some cases, the building might still be there. Sometimes they're not. Leo wins this bout, and there on the right is the flyer from that fight with his name highlighted there next to Shorty Groff's. It's also important for me to say back then, to kind of set up the rest of the program here. Back then, in the early 1900s, there was no Pennsylvania Boxing Commission. It was almost a free-for-all. There were really no strict regulations, okay? That's something else that's going to come up later on. Excuse me. His next fight was on April 17th, 1905, ended in a draw against a boxer named Pinky Evans. Didn't they have creative names back then? Battling this and Pinky that, and okay. In 1906, Leo was now fighting approximately 1 fight per month up until about June. That's something that would be unheard of from today's professional boxing standards, okay? Between fights, he kept athletic, he kept active. participating in those other sports, basketball, football, okay? During that time, the city of Lancaster became a boxing mecca. That was the thing to do. You would pay a nickel, maybe you would pay 10 cents for a front row seat, and you would go there. Hundreds of people would crowd. Cigar smoke would fill the room, okay? All right, so it was a big deal. These boxers, even though, they were scrappy in many cases, they drew a large crowd. And the promoters knew this and would promote these fights. They would hang up these posters and these flyers on telephone poles and in general stores, and they would have 5, 6, 7 matches per card, okay? Sometimes they'd hand out free prizes if you stayed to the end. There might be a raffle or a drawing for a free turkey or a box of cigars or a pound of cheese from the local butcher, things like that. Anything to get people to buy a ticket. Now, these two last names that I mentioned, Harry Hensel and H. Walter Schlichter, they were very important, not just in the Lancaster boxing realm, but also in Leo's boxing career during his early part of his career. They believed in this boy. They saw that he was starting to draw a crowd. He was winning most of his matches, and they really wanted to, keep promoting this boy, put his name, his face, his boxing pose on posters all around Lancaster City. Again, they were in it for the money, let's face it. This is just one of the many flyers that you would have seen, again, on a telephone pole, wherever, okay, hanging up. Now, this is funny. Schlichter, who we just talked about, on one of these posters early on accidentally spelled Leo's last name with an O, H-O-U-C-K. Well, his last name was Houck, H-A-U-C-K. It's pronounced the same, but it's spelled differently. Houck. But the family name is Houck, H-A-U-C-K. Schlichter spelled it wrong on one of these flyers. Leo looked at it and just kind of chuckled and said, I like it. So from then on to the rest of his boxing career, that's the way he spelled his name. Maybe it was his ring name, I don't know, but he didn't seem to mind it. 1908, he's now 20 years old. He was attracting the attention of the boxing community on the West Coast. Now imagine that. There was, of course, no internet, no smartphones, no TV, word of mouth, newspapers, okay? To attract attention back then for an up-and-coming boxer from the small town of Lancaster all the way to the West Coast, he had to be, pretty talented. In April of that year, he traveled outside of Lancaster for the first time and fought Phil Griffin in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, he did lose that fight. During this time in his career, he was fighting as a lightweight, okay? Again, he was starting to attract more and more people at these shows, okay? By 1909, Hensel and Schlichter had a star on their hands, and they knew it, and I talked about that earlier. During this time, Leo was referred to Lancaster County's lightweight champion, okay? First 10-round fight he participated in was in 1910 against a boxer named Young Nitschke at Academy Hall in Reading, Pennsylvania, not too far from here. Over 100 fans from Lancaster and many from Philadelphia traveled just to see him box, okay? Leo wins in a newspaper decision. Now, I should probably stop here and explain what a newspaper decision win or loss is. Remember how I said earlier there was no boxing commission? The rules were very different. It was almost like a wild, wild west. What a newspaper decision was, now again, there was no smartphones or TVs. A reporter from the local newspaper, okay, let's say the Lancaster newspaper, would go cover that fight ringside. He would stay for most of the fight. There wasn't time to stay at the end, because then he'd have to go back, write the story, and then have, of course, the newspaper printed the next day. So he was on a very tight deadline. And if he was traveling to Reading or to Philadelphia from Lancaster, again, he had to leave that much early. Sometimes they left 2 or 3 rounds into a 10-round fight. So what a newspaper decision is the reporter, recollecting his version of the story based on the rounds that he saw. So if Leo and young Nietzsche were fighting, and the reporter's at this match, okay, and let's say it's in Philadelphia and it's 10 rounds, the reporter has to leave after the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. To him, whoever was winning at the time won by newspaper decision. Crazy, I know. Crazy, but that's how it was. There were times where you would see Leo won a newspaper decision, and another newspaper, another reporter covered it for another newspaper. That reporter would have him losing. So it was crazy. You have to really, if you're researching old-time boxing, you really have to do your due diligence and do a deep dive and look at many, many sources to figure out who actually won the fight, okay? So that's newspaper decision. That's what that is. 1910, Leo has a pivotal fight with a boxer named Mickey Gannon. Now, this took place in Philadelphia. Mickey Gannon he was pretty good. But for Leo, this was, at least up until this point, this is the biggest name that Leo fought. And all his friends and all his family they tried to talk him out of it. They thought he was going to get crushed. They thought he was going to get killed. Well, he decides, after talking to his manager got the fight, by the way, I'm going to go ahead with it. And he wins. He defeats Mickey Gannon, okay? Knocks him out. This elevates Leo's boxing career even more. Okay? Last point, I just talked about how a lot of his friends and family thought he was in over his head, he was crazy. But he decided to do it anyway. Another interesting thing about this particular fight, in January, okay, it looks like I have another extra slide in there. There we go. Leo beat Gannon wearing 2 right shoes. I found this out recently, okay? I don't know how it happened. Maybe he grabbed the wrong boots, whatever. But he had 2 right feet, okay? That's a little newspaper snippet that I found. Hopefully you can read that from where you're sitting. That footwear was to play a crucial role in his future fights. Now, that's the first time I've ever heard of this. And some members of his family who I've talked to, they've never talked about this, so I'm not even sure that they're aware of this. But at least for this fight, that pivotal fight with Mickey Gannon, he wore two right shoes. He's now having matches a few days apart. He's in demand. He's making pretty good money, okay? But again, think about that. Boxing on TV now, how often does a professional boxer fight? Once a year, twice a year, okay? He's fighting only a few days apart. His hands are either broken or bruised. His ribs are bruised, and he's still going at it. Again, Wild Wild West, hardly any, if ever, no boxing regulations. He defeats another boxer named Yi Earn on March 31st of that year to earn the lightweight champion of the East title. The titles were also very different back then. There was a lightweight champion of the East, the West, the North, the South, a welterweight, a middleweight, a flyweight, a this weight, a that weight, okay? Everyone claimed the belt, and I'll explain why in a bit, okay? That same year, he goes from a lightweight to a middleweight. So he's getting older, he's getting bigger, he's getting stronger, he's getting, better and better fighters. He's now traveling more. His first boxing match out of state is in Connecticut to face Fighting Dick Nelson, a welterweight, which is more or less the same as a middleweight. Again, the waters are a little murky. He also, that same year, he's so popular now, he's a nationally known athlete, that he gets his likeness on a tobacco card, a cigarette card, okay? Here it is. You can come up and see this card after the program. Back then, in 1910, if you bought a pack of Turkish whiffs cigarettes, kind of like baseball cards or finding a prize in a cereal box, you might be lucky enough to find a boxer in these Turkish whiff cigarettes that were, of course, mailed all around the United States. So just imagine how big this guy was from Lancaster, that he had his own national baseball card, well, tobacco card, cigarette card. That's the back in front of it. 1910. Okay. Now, he fights a guy named Harry Lewis, who was credited with holding the welterweight championship between 1908 and 1911. Leo is victorious via a newspaper decision win. So we're not really sure, unless we were there, who won. But according to the newspaper, Leo won. But Leo did not knock Lewis out. Another strange thing about that back then, in order for the belts to change hands, you had to knock your opponent out. You couldn't win by a decision. You couldn't get the belt by a newspaper decision win. You had to knock your opponent out, okay? It's very important. That might come up later too. By the end of 1910, he would fight 28 times. So, on the average of just over every other week. February 1911, he gets a newspaper decision win against one of his biggest rivals who he's fought in the past, Battling Levinsky, the world light heavyweight champion. Okay? Newspaper decision win. No knockout, but Leo receives a standing ovation. May 3rd, Leo meets Harry Lewis again. We just talked about Harry Lewis. This time in Paris at the Hippodrome. It was promoted as the World Middleweight Championship bout. Remember, Lewis was welterweight champion, okay? Promoted as a World Middleweight Championship bout, Lewis was welterweight champion. I said that twice for a reason. Leo defeats Harry Lewis. 20 rounds. He wins by decision. And he was announced as the new middleweight champion in front of 10,000 people in Paris. He was carried off on the shoulders of his fans and was offered endorsement deals, luxury trips, a new car, all these personal appearance, autograph deals. He was, by any stretch, a celebrity. He earned $8,000 for that fight, by the way, in 2023 money, over $257,000. Okay? There's the headline from the paper. But then, here's where it gets crazy again. The next day, he ends up being a contender for the belt without losing it in the ring because he was announced the champion. They even said it. But in France, him and Lewis were fighting as middleweights. This title really didn't exist back then. There was no middleweight title. There was a welterweight title, but not a middleweight. Also, Lewis's title really wasn't up for grabs. It was not promoted as a championship fight. Leo was still regarded a champion in the middleweight division. So even after all this gray area here, he kind of took that in stride as, well, I'm still a champion. People think of me as a champion. I'll fight anyone, you know. I don't need a belt to tell me, you know. So instead of cashing on all those deals that I told you about, like the trips, the special appearances, he decided to just go back to Lancaster. He was homesick, missed his family, didn't like to travel, didn't like to stay away from home at any extended periods of time. But that fight that I just talked about brought him bigger and bigger names. He was really beginning to be taken seriously. In fact, he was ranked in the top 5 middleweights in all of America. He finishes the 1911 season with 11 wins, 3 losses, and 2 draws. Still has yet to be knocked out. Okay? Still has yet to be knocked out. Now, this picture here is 3 iconic guys from boxing. You can see the caption, Battling Levinsky on the left, Leo in the center, Harry Lewis on the right. As you can tell, this was later in their life. They're all sitting together with smiles on their faces, so they must have found peace among each other. 1912, Leo marries Anna Kirshner in that summer. He's now considered a middleweight. November, he defeats a gentleman named Dave Smith, the middleweight champion of Australia. Okay, Dave Smith came here. The middleweight champion belt wasn't on the line, so Leo didn't get to win it. But again, wow, he beat a middleweight champion. Okay? October 1913 now. Let me just say this. I mean, he's fought so many times. I'm just giving you the highlights of his matches here. I mean, there's just not time to go into every single match. I'm just giving you the highlights. 1913, October, defeats Jack Dillon at Rocky Springs Park. Some of us are familiar where that was. That same month, George Chipp, really good boxer, wins the title from Frank Klaus and claims the middleweight crown. He gets the middleweight title from from Frank Klaus. Leo was scheduled to fight George Chipp even before Chipp wins the belt. This is good news for Leo. Things are finally looking good. I'm going to have this match here with George Chipp. I'm going to knock him out, and I'm going to get a belt, finally. Okay? That next month, Leo outpoints Chipp, is awarded the newspaper decision. Not a knockout, so no belts change hands. A lot of frustration in his life. 3 days later, Leo claims the middleweight title. This time he's had enough. He's like, look, I'm the middleweight champion. I feel like I've earned it. I've had these setbacks for this reason or this technicality. And I'm just going to say I'm the middleweight champion. And if anyone wants to fight me, here I am. Okay, the next year, 1914, February, a contract is finally signed between George Chipp, remember him, and Leo for a 12-round rematch. Chipp now has the belt, so all Leo has to do is knock him out. Leo has beaten Chipp before. However, Chipp breaks his right hand a few weeks earlier than that. The contract is signed in a fight against Joe Borrell. Another setback for Leo. The rematch is pushed back until March and then until April. April 7th, something very interesting happens. George Chipp faces an unknown, obscure boxer named Al McCoy. McCoy, the underdog, knocks out Chipp, becomes the new champ. Okay, then you would think, wow, now Leo has it really easy. All he has to do is face Al McCoy, and he's got what he thinks is an easy victory, and he finally gets the belt. No such luck. McCoy runs back to New York, dodges Leo, and refuses to fight him. Another big missed opportunity there. 1915, Leo fires his manager, Lou Durlacher, and hires Duke Kelly, who's standing there on the left, as his new manager. Okay? 1 year later, he's now fighting as a light heavyweight. 1917, April 6th, Leo fights Tommy Burke at the Fulton Opera House. It was the very first boxing match held at the Fulton Opera House. Over 1,000 people in attendance. Leo wins. There's a clipping, a news clipping. If you see the fourth line down, see where it says the wind-up? By the way, the wind-up is the match before the main event. So there's all these matches, then the main event. The wind-up is the match before the main event. I don't know who fought in the main event. In May, Leo receives a light heavyweight title shot against Badalin Novinsky, one of his former rivals. They've boxed several times prior. Leo won every time. Unfortunately, Leo loses. Setback again. Leo's now refereeing boxing matches. He's starting to get a little older. Continues to play lots of basketball and baseball. October of that year, the year's winding down, he beats heavyweight Willie Meehan in Philadelphia. Manager Duke Kelly fails to see that this could be a huge boost to Leo's career. Willie Meehan was a big, well-known boxer that Leo just beat, okay? This oversight might have cost Houck a match with Jack Dempsey. They were supposed to fight, and Duke Kelly just didn't really follow up on it. Another missed opportunity for Leo. 1919, Houck loses several matches, even to some where he was easily picked to win. What's happening? He announces his retirement from boxing in August of that year. His retirement lasts 1 month. Couldn't stay away from the ring, although, again, he's starting to get older now. But then he announces that during the off-season, he's accepted a position as a boxing coach for Franklin and Marshall College. 1920, Leo fights Gene Tunney. Some of you are most likely familiar with that name. In Philadelphia, that's where they fought. 8 rounds end in a draw. Okay, another record says Leo lost, probably because of that newspaper decision win, depending on what newspaper you picked up the next day. He meets Gene Tunney again 1 month later, another draw, also goes down as a newspaper decision for Leo. So again, depending on what news outlet or newspaper you pick up, you don't know what to believe. 1921, only one fight that whole year against Dan O'Dowd on the Atlantic City Boardwalk in New Jersey. Leo loses. By way of newspaper decision anyway, so again, unless you were there and saw the whole thing, can't always trust a newspaper decision. Here he is sparring with Jack Dempsey in 1921 in Atlantic City, okay? The backstory here was Jack Dempsey was gearing up to fight George Carpentier. They did scouting, I guess, to find some boxers around the Pennsylvania area who could spar with Jack Dempsey. Leo Houck, who's on the left there, his back to us, was one of 3 boxers picked in the state of Pennsylvania to spar with Jack Dempsey. 1922, Leo and his sparring partner, Joel Ritchie, they traveled to Cuba. Unfortunately, although it was a big deal for the boxing world and for Leo certainly, the media really didn't cover much about it. You won't find much about it out there, about his trip to Cuba. He fights Kid Cardenas and then a gentleman named Santiago Esperoga. Or as Leo would say, and I quote, Santiago Asparagus. That's what he said in one paper article that I did find. Leo wins both fights, by the way. Here on the right is a booklet or a program from his trip to Cuba. You can see, look at him, he's getting older now. Still has a few good fights in him, but he's no spring chicken anymore. 1922, at age 34, Leo hired to coach boxing at Penn State, a position he would hold up until almost his death, up until 1949, okay? So he was at a crossroads. My best boxing days are probably behind me, although I have a few matches left in me. How am I going to make money and support my family, feed my kids? So him and his wife talked about him moving up to Penn State and then coming home on the weekends back to Lancaster. Along the way, while up at Penn State, he developed many champions. It's funny, he would refer to everybody as Fred. Colleagues, the person at the bar or restaurant, his boxing students. I don't know where the origin of the Fred thing came from, but I think it's funny. Okay, Fred. Thank you, Fred. Good job, Fred. Fred. February 26, he opens a tailor shop during the off season of boxing at 154 North Queen Street in Lancaster, selling tuxedos, suits, and knickers. I didn't believe this either until I came across this article, this advertisement in the Lancaster newspaper, and the business didn't last too long at all. But I think that's just kind of funny that when he wasn't training boxers up at Penn State, he was working there. So certainly a hard worker. August 1926, he comes out of 3 years retirement from boxing, has his last professional fight at age 37 against Sailor Jack Grady at Rossmere Park, Lancaster. Leo wins by TKO. Now, you see the newspaper headline here. The way they worded it, Leo Houck stages sensational comeback in ring. Yes, he won. Yes, he came back out of retirement. But some people might read that as, oh, he's back. He's going to be fighting on a regular basis. That wasn't the case, okay? A little bit of sensationalism there. He had no intention to fight past this last match here, as much as other people wanted him to do so. Coaches Penn State till 1949, gets sick, passes away January 21st, 1950 at age 61. So now let's talk about some of the things involving his legacy. If you go to Buchanan Park, you will see this monument on the campus of F&M near the North Museum. It was originally dedicated and unveiled December 3rd, 1950 at Stump Field, okay? But now, like I said, since 1957, it's been moved to Buchanan Park. Anyone can go out and see it. It's about, 7, 8 feet high. His boxing career spanned from 1904 to 1926, 22 years. He fought in every division, from flyweight, okay, the whole way up to heavyweight. Think about that. Every weight division he fought in. Again, something that's completely unheard of these days. As we learned, he fought many world champions, battled in Levinsky, Harry Lewis, Jack Tunney, sparred with Jack Dempsey. He fought all the greats. Professional record, for you numbers people out there, 144 wins, 39 losses, but was never knocked out, ever. He might have lost fights, but he was never knocked out cold. So the question comes up, why did he never win a championship? Now, we talked about some of the missteps and some of the fumbles along the way. And I want to add to that, subpar managers that were more interested in money than his career. Other sports took up a lot of his time. Baseball, basketball, okay? He would come home from a fight by train from Philadelphia or Harrisburg or wherever, and instead of training for the next fight that he knew he had a week later, he would spend the next day playing basketball or football or baseball. So certainly, again, boxing was his favorite sport and the one that he's most known for, but he liked to play other sports too. He also hated to be away from home. So traveling for any extended amount of times around Europe, we talked about his time in France, he just wanted to come home. He had just hated to travel, okay? So those are the three main points I would say when people ask me why he never won a championship. Again, you add that to all the misfortunes that he had with these belts changing hands and switching, and no real Pennsylvania Boxing Commission back then. 1969, he's inducted into the Ring Magazine Hall of Fame. Ring is a very well-known boxing magazine. 1971, a painting of Leo, you can see it there on the right, was commissioned and hung at Rec Hall at Penn State. Okay. 1972, he's inducted into the Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame. 2012, more recently, he's inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in New York State. 2002, featured in Penn State's All Sports Museum up at the campus there at State College. He was also considered to be, I touched on this earlier in the program, one of the best boxing referees in the state. Okay, he also refereed on the side for extra money. He trained many champions in the Eastern Collegiate Division. Okay, a lot of his students went on to box semi-professionally or professionally. There is a wonderful book by Randy Swope. I have a copy of it up here if you want to thumb through it. Published in 2019 about Leo's life. The matches that I talked about tonight are mentioned in here, along with so many other great matches, more about his time at Penn State, more about his family life. It's an excellent book. You can just go on Amazon. You can order it. Just type in Leo Houck or Randy Swope, the author, to get your copy. But it's just an excellent book on Leo. So that's the program. We're at exactly 45 minutes. As I said, if anyone wants to come up after, you can look at some of the memorabilia, the pictures, the news articles, the clippings, the book, the tobacco card. Feel free to look at any of those things there after the program. But at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has. Yes, Wilbur.
I'm curious, did you say he married a woman by the name of Kirchner?
Kirchner, yeah, Anna Kirchner.
There was back in the 80s and maybe 90s, there was a big sports writers banquet every year that Lancaster.
Kirchner, yeah.
And there was a George Kirchner award.
I don't know if they were related or not. A guy that was also in that circle was Leo's brother, Johnny Houck, who was a boxing historian and did a lot for, look, do you remember Johnny Houck, or you know the name? Okay. Yeah, yes, sir.
You said that he had some descendants or family, you just kind of mentioned it now. Do they still live in the area? Does he have grandchildren?
Yeah, he has grandchildren. I think he has some great-grandchildren, too. His last son, Joe, passed away in June, but most of his relatives are still in the Lancaster, Cabbage Hill area. Yes, and there was a hand over there. Yes, sir.
As a youth, growing up, did he have a boxing idol that he looked up to that might have inspired you?
That's a great question. I've never come across anything like that. I would say the closest idol, probably his first manager, Jack Miley. You could maybe make a strong argument, because Miley was somewhat of a amateur boxer in Philadelphia who moved to Lancaster, opened a gym, and that's remember how I said Leo started hanging around there? So that would be the closest I would guess. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You know the cause of death, Deb?
Yeah, he had cancer. Yep. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. Again, yeah. Feel free to come on up.
All right, everybody, thank you. Thank you, Cory. See you all on March 21st for the history of Wat and Shan.